panel really tackles the topic of scaling climate tech in Asia from the startup perspective. And first panel is all about investors. Now we'll hear from the operators. So I have the pleasure of bringing together 4 amazing leaders from exciting startups who are tackling the sustainability problem through innovation in material, logistics, and energy production. So our panel today will tackle the topic from 2 angles. First, we'll look at how startups are leveraging Asia's strength in manufacturing to scale up innovation. And secondly, we'll look at how innovation itself can actually help Asia, because Asia's industry is actually accounting for a large percentage of global carbon emissions, energy usage, and waste. So without further ado, let's have the speakers do a brief round of self-introduction.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Ying Liu. I'm the founder and CEO of Blue Lake Packaging. We're specializing in fiber-based functional packaging solutions. I'm based in Palo Alto. I have a lab and a demo production line in Suzhou, China. And part of my career actually started with Apple about 25 years ago. And I have done many different projects, hardware related in supply chain. I've been to over 1,000 factories in Asia. I was the very first expatriate that Apple sent from Cupertino to Shanghai to start the entire Apple China operations from scratch. Fast forward, I've been working on my packaging. Like, I'm super passionate about my sustainable packaging venture, and it has been 5th year. Look forward to sharing some thoughts and experience.
Thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Hannah Stieber. I currently run a company in the cold chain business, so that's the temperature sensitive supply chain. And we're building physical hardware, so shippers for middle mile and last mile logistics, and then all the smart IoT. And I think I'm here because prior to this, I ran a business actually that was based in Shenzhen called EcoFlow. It's in the mobile battery space, and scaled that completely with Chinese investors, Chinese capital, with the U.S. and global market. And then my current company, Arctic, while we have U.S. investors, we do have production in Shenzhen and spend a lot of time there. So I'm very focused across 2 different business models, or 2 different companies on 2 different ways to grow through partnerships of both the U.S. and Asia.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello everyone, my name is Ghazal Izadi. I am Chief Operating Officer for a climate tech startup based in Silicon Valley. I have a question. How many of you knows what is geothermal? Okay, great. So we are building the next generation technology for geothermal to develop and produce green baseload power. How many of you know what is the ring of the fire? Excellent. So it means that Asia Pacific, most of the countries sit on the very high temperature resource beneath your feet that we can extract the heat and convert it to power. So even though our market is focusing a lot on the North America, especially Western US, Asia Pacific, from Japan, Indonesia, Philippines, Taiwan, all of these areas is the super interesting location for the green baseload power generation from the heat in the earth. So our technology is a waterless, without water generating power through the geothermal technologies. We are very fortunate to have our investor from Taiwan, B Current and MIH Capital. So very fortunate to are working and collaborating with Asia Pacific country. Before joining XGS, I was in oil and gas for more than a decade, and I did a lot of projects in China, extracting the unconventional hydrocarbon from the very low permeability porosity rock. So we know how to extract the energy from the subsurface through a lot of advancement in technology from oil and gas. So now pivoting to energy transition and geothermal and working with these regions is our goal. So thank you.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Ying, CEO and co-founder of TomTest. And at TomTest, we have a very simple mission. We want to take on synthetic plastic material and replace them with something truly better. So our technology can turn biopolymer from nature. I'm talking about like shells with waste, mushroom, or even microbe to high sustainable materials that contain no plastic, no toxic chemical, and 100% fully bio-based. And we want to replace synthetic and animal leather first. So what we do is we can really engineer this material that have the same beautiful aesthetic and performance just like lambskin or even better. And the other values of the material is significant lower carbon footprint and also have the price parity or even cheaper than traditional leather. We're talking about working with a lot of people around the world, brands from Europe, in Asia, here in America as well, making products like the shoe that you're wearing, the jacket that you wear, or basically like the chair that you sit on, without compromise on the aesthetic, the quality, and the performance of that product. Because at Tomtest, we truly believe that everyone deserves better material, the material that is good and is healthy for you to use, and also be gentle on the planet.
Awesome. So let's jump straight into our first topic, which is kind of exploring how startups are leveraging Asia's strength in manufacturing. Maybe I'll start with you, Ying, because I know you have your R&D center and the demo line in Suzhou. Why China? What's like the strength that China kind of provides for your company?
When first I started Blue Lake Packaging, I definitely explored the US on the talent side. We look at the many different universities and the many different sort of researchers and scientists in the fiber space. And I have to say, after a very extensive research, I had to conclude the talent, actually, the access to talent is not necessarily in the US. So I turned to Asia and I found quite a few universities and also find my technical partner there in Suzhou. So that's how we started in the first place. And now I have a company of close to 40 people and most of them are masters and in the fiber or some are in the polymer or manufacturing technologies. So I just found like the talent probably is one of the primary reason that we choose Suzhou or China as our lab and the demo production base.
Anything you want to add, Hannah?
I'll just add, to play a little bit of maybe devil's advocate with some of the conversation we heard earlier. For us, to manufacture, we tried to manufacture in the US starting out. So we looked at CMs, 2 CMs here, 1 in Mexico, and then 1 in Shenzhen. And we tested them all against each other. And the ones in the US were not only more expensive, which we expected, but they were actually lower quality and delayed. And so when you're a startup and you're on, kind of borrowed time, speed to market matters. And for our business, we sell into pharma, so quality, the highest level of quality matters. And so for us, it was similar to Ying, not just talent, but just kind of the knowledge base for building an electromechanical product wasn't here for startups. So that doesn't mean long term, but at least from an NPI perspective and getting your first prototypes, first product to market, there was a lot of benefit to being in Shenzhen.
I'm also curious, Ring. I know that Tomtest obviously is in the business of turning food waste into high value usable material. How does the supply chain in Asia help you achieve that in a cost effective way?
Yeah, so I think we partnership with a lot of manufacturer around the world. We have folks in Italy, folks here in Ohio and in Vietnam, and really lucky that our technology, we don't have to build fancy facility. So the best part of it is partnership with them. But 4 years ago, we start in Vietnam first because the problem there feel very urgent and personal to me in the way that fishery and agriculture in Vietnam mark up 13% of the GDP of the nations, and is really basically we farm fish, we raise shrimp, we export all of this overseas, tons of it, and the problem here is a lot of culture doesn't consume the shells, so tons of it just end up in our backyard. So that part of supply chain were left behind, and these basically the waste pollution that contaminate the environment and the people live around it. On the other hand, shockingly, 15-60% of the inputs that we use for farming and raw inputs to produce is actually imported. So I can see the missing link here in the way that why don't we have this closed loop ecosystem and kind of like the way that we process the material, that like we can take the raw material from waste input, kind of like very local in that region agriculture, and then treat it with a more gentle, non-toxic process and create new high-performance material. So I think Vietnam have all the kind of like foundation that I'm looking for. The manufacturing kind of network, skilled laborers, government support, and if you have all this together with the right technology, things move really fast. So yeah, we 4 years old company, and from lab to scaled up within just 3 years, because of we tackling the problem, we know where we can move fast, and that model we can apply into different parts as well, like partnership or not partnership, but more so focused on the local community.
Maybe coming to you, Gazelle, like, what are the special contributions that Asia supply chain has in terms of the parts and the materials needed to build a geothermal plant?
So I think this week when you sit in a lot of discussion, it's all about energy. Everything that this panel and this innovator is doing, they require energy. We need energy not only because we want to change, green energy, not because we care about planet, which we do, but it is for life quality. So if you think about Asia Pacific, even geothermal is a very, very tiny in terms of the energy mix compared to the other sources, baseload power. We are looking at about less than 1%, which is so tiny. But if you think about what we hear today about energy need and the power for the data centers, from 200 terawatt hour to 10 times more in 5 years, right? Where is this energy is coming from? And everybody wants to be a good green resident on the grid. So when you look at South Asia and Asia, they are providing 50% of the geothermal power. So from today, we have about 13 gigawatt power from geothermal, 7 to 8 gigawatt is coming from South Asia. So they have the resource, they have the skilled labor, they have the engineering hub. So why we are super excited about Asia Pacific is that we can leverage not only the political part, because we know that a lot of these countries have feed-in tariff. Everybody is worried about the political issues that are happening today in this administration. But if you think about the localization and the economy at these countries and the need, the demand for energy, this is the best market signal we have to be in this anywhere around the globe. We can bring the technology, we can use the advanced manufacturing. When we think about building the steel, cement, local drilling, Philippines and Indonesia build the best skill set to access to the hot rock to drill. They know how to do it. We don't need outside of the Asia Pacific skill set. The technology can transfer. So I'm super excited about, I don't think that, at least in our situation, we are going to be worried about what is happening politically, because we are going to work with and collaborate with the Asia Pacific team to make the green energy from the heat beneath your feet as geothermal.
I guess maybe this is a question for all. It's like, I think for your startups, obviously sustainability is a very key part of your DNA, for your product's image. How does having your supply chain in China help with this? So for example, Hannah, I know that usually you've done an LCA on your product, and tell us about the surprising finding about your supply chain.
So we did a life cycle assessment on our first product. So that means, understanding the full emissions all the way from our sourcing, manufacturing processes, use through end of life. And what we found is, we had done so much work to limit emissions when it came to the design. So kind of how we designed the product, the specific components we chose, and, how we designed for disposal, so end of life recycling. And so the biggest contributor to our emissions was actually the transport. So it was how we move components together. So think about your second tier and third tier components moving kind of between suppliers all the way up to assembly. And then, of course, moving to the end user. And so something that I think is often maybe underrated is just how deep the supply chain is, particularly again for us in Shenzhen, of having all of that co-located. And so what we were able to do is make a few small changes that actually brought our embedded emissions significantly down. And that meant that we were able now to pay off within 3 to 4 shipments compared to the status quo. And so we have a very compelling carbon value prop because we were able to, show this out through a third-party LCA, so a third-party performance of the total emissions of the life cycle.
I think this is a good segue to kind of part 2 of our discussion, which is looking at how innovation can help tackle some of these climate and sustainable challenges in Asia itself. Maybe I'll come back to you, Ying, because I think you're seeing a lot of incentives and pressures from companies to reduce the emissions and reduce the waste in their packaging. Where are these pressures coming from, and how does the private sector help drive the adoption of your more sustainable products?
So we definitely see across the board, actually, a lot of this demand are driven by kind of multinational companies. For instance, the company I'm familiar with, like Apple, Apple, Google, those big tech companies have already set their packaging goals to completely eliminate, plastic, by 2025, actually a little bit ahead of their game plan. And also there are other companies at, 2030. And then we've seen a lot of European companies on our client base that, because of the EU regulations, they extended producer responsibility law that's going to be in effect next year. So a lot of companies are really driving the sustainability innovations in their packaging, for instance. And what we see is, I think, when it comes to, say, China or Asia, I totally agree with the other panelists that mentioned not only the talent, but also the supply chain. When we talk about looking at the manufacturing equipment, I give you a perfect example that, for tooling in China, in the area that I'm familiar with, it's normally take 25 to 30 days to fabricate a tool. But if this is happening in US, so we look around, honestly, it could be easily 3 months. And then if we're talking about, Europe, I have another example that, we reach out to somebody and then that person become on paternity leave for 6 months and then disappear after that. So that's, I think, a lot of the reason that the driving, when we look at, Asia or China, people talking about 996 means they work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and 6 days a week. But if you look at Europe, I just came back from Europe 2 weeks ago, and people show up at 9:30 and then left at 4:30 p.m. And then there are tons of vacations, I guess. So they're very different kind of work culture. So when it comes to velocity, I say, in terms of innovation, I really see, the supply chain, sort of the work culture there. And then also, I think just the mentality of getting things done are somewhat different from other areas that I'm working with.
Yeah, I think I'm curious as, obviously Asia supply chain has so much strength and, they are growing larger and larger every day, but that also comes with, extra demand on energy, extra waste, extra emissions. Does that kind of bring you concerns? It's kind of an open question for you all. What are some of the challenges and maybe opportunities you see as Asia tries to tackle its own climate problems?
So I think the challenge is the speed, how we can keep up with the demand, right? So when we are looking at the power generation technology, a lot of this is coming from Japan, right? Turbine, pumps, heat exchanger, all the units and equipments that require for the power generation. And then when you look at the life cycle from building these plants and also how you feed into these plants with different type of resource. So usually we are looking about 2 to 3 years, right? Building a full capacity 30 megawatt power plant. And it's nothing, right? 30 megawatt is nothing compared to what we are talking about, the global demand, which is gigawatt, right? We are talking about 6,000 megawatts, and I'm talking about 30 megawatts. So I think that those are some of the challenges we need to how we can speed up using the local talent in terms of project development, I think we need to leverage these incentives from the government. I think for our energy production, permitting can be a very long part, which is very important. How we can accelerate that with the new technology. For example, Japan, when you are drilling the well and you touch on the onsen water, it is a religious thing. You cannot do it. So I think next generation of technologies is really removing those type of environmental and religious things. So we are really working on different angle to make sure that it's not only supply chain, but how we can make this project faster, right? So it requires more working with the government and making that happen.
Yeah, I think Vietnam manufacturing is one of the like really growing area in compared to other countries, neighbor countries. We have markup of like 24% of the GDP, and with the growth rate 8% every year. It grown rapidly, opened a lot of opportunity for innovations, but at the same time, I'm honestly a little bit afraid, because if we're growing so fast and we don't have the sustainable kind of like infrastructure that support the wastewater treatment, the safety of the worker, the clean energy, the local environment and local people will be the one who pays the price. So the reason that I choose Vietnam to facilitate this first, because it's not just about labor and the cost, but it's also about we think that we can make the difference. So a lot of people don't know that the Vietnamese government is very strict on all the toxic chemicals that come into treating synthetic material, for example, like PU, PVC. So the partner that we work in Vietnam, they cannot mix the formulation resins in-house. They have to buy all of these pre-mixed formulations and produce it in the factory. So we think that we really like that regulations, and we want to show up with something that is clean, is non-toxic, fully bio-based. It's a win-win for us and for the manufacturer and for the people there, because they don't have to deal with all these dangerous chemicals, and also they can own more on this supply chains. So I think we finishing and kind of like we successfully built in Vietnam, we can actually implement it in other partners that we work with as well.
Actually, I want to add one thing, because I didn't realize until after everybody talked about this, is I found like four of us as entrepreneurs, our companies have one thing in common, meaning that actually we develop technology regardless of where the technology was born, but that technology can be applied globally, right? So you can source locally, produce locally, consume locally, and in my case, recycle locally as well. So because for a lot of people may or may not be aware, like, wood pulp, like the pulping industry, U.S. has the largest pulping export in the world. Between U.S. and Canada, and then the Nordic countries and then Brazil. Actually, China is the biggest importer. A lot of pulp, even though China has the world's largest paper mills, like the paper output. So as you can see, if you put all these technologies in the global landscape, it actually doesn't really matter in a way that where the technology was developed. It's a matter of where the market is and how adaptive the local market will be to that kind of technology. Right? So I think back to your question that, I definitely see there are certain incentives locally, but at the same time, when it comes to sustainability, it become a matter of, I think, people look at how this will benefit the local community and how it will benefit the local economy as a whole.
Very well said. Bravo.
Awesome. I think we are just coming up to our last 5 minutes, so we'd love to open up to the floor to see if there's any question from the audience that you would like to ask. Don't be shy.
Thank you all for all of your insights. One quick question. One of the things I was hearing, except from the geothermal side, was mostly thinking of Asian markets as supply side versus demand side. How have you all thought about demand from these growing economies? I mean, they're clearly skyrocketing, and GDP per capita is getting to the place where it's near parity. Will you be selling to those, or do you think about US first and then other markets?
Yeah, I will echo what Ying said, which is, we think about building a platform technology that is global. And so while we've started in the US, we started there because we had the most connections and network kind of ability to get to market quickly. But there's a lot of various reasons that make Asia quite an attractive market. So on the cold chain and where we work in middle mile and last mile, one is just kind of urban topographics, if you will, of places like Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, even parts of Southeast Asia, Thailand. We've looked at, because they're doing so much middle mile and last mile logistics, and spoilage is rampant. You're often seeing anywhere from 15 to 20% of post-harvest produce spoil because of lack of refrigeration. So in some ways, establishing our brand in the US, I think, has helped us get smarter, get quicker, get this. But wherever we go, we'll need to localize. And so we always look for local partners. And so we very much see, while we produce in Asia, we very much see them also as customers, but with the caveat that we would want to find the right partners there at a country by country level, rather than just kind of plop in, even from a tech perspective.
I think for my company, I'm a little bit opposite, to what Hannah just said, because we actually look at, we design the technology for market outside of China, I have to say. And because of, in China, most of the factories or equipment, if you've been to a paper mill or any of the packaging companies, those gigantic. But then the technology we're developing actually is nimble. We try to make it become more sort of, like I said, the locally sourced, produced, and then probably serve our market of maybe 300 miles, and not necessarily become a central hub of a gigantic sort of factory. So we're actually just using similar concept, but in a different way. Like, we look at US, we look at Europe, because there are premium clients that would be willing to pay a little bit higher price, for sustainable packaging. Rather than if you look at China, I think that they have different challenges right now in the manufacturing. So I have to say, sustainable packaging may or may not be their highest priority at this point. So that's the reason why that we look at the technology development, by taking advantage of the talent and the supply chain, as I mentioned, in China, but we look at the market outside of China.
Yeah, I think I just want to add a small thing is, for us, it's really depending on the brand, because if they distribute in Asia, so the manufacturer that we work with is actually majority produced for Coach and my for in New York. So basically, if they want to distribute it in Asia or in Europe or back in the US, we work with them to do that. So
I think we might have time for one last quick question, if there's anyone out there who wants to ask.
Thank you so much for the panel. It's very impressive. I have a question on the policies here, not just the tariffs. Many of the materials sourced locally, but the product itself is sold across the globe. How does the current administration or policies impact you? Not just the short term, how do you foresee the long term in 2 or 4 years, the risks? How are you going to prepare for that?
I definitely feel like the sort of the motivation to answer that question, because I've been thinking about this, and I know this question will be coming. And to be honest with you, for Blue Lake Packaging, we designed the whole supply chain independent of administration. We started 5 years ago. We did not take any government money either from the US or from China. We were backed up by US institutional investors. But we intentionally design our structure and our company independent of the political sort of reasons or dependencies. So that's one thing I want to mention. And secondly, I think that right now the current administration is promoting, made in US. But for at least for my company, we actually intentionally, as I mentioned, we designed a solution for country like US or Europe, like European countries. but not really for a reason that, for the geopolitical, to sort of mitigate the geopolitical risk, but it's really for, I think, what makes sense from the supply chain point of view. So as a supply chain professional, we always look at the cost, look at quality, we look at flexibility, time to market, time to volume. I think some of the terms like other panelists also mentioned. So when we look at design this as a whole solution, we look at, what makes sense to produce locally. So back to your question, I definitely see, I care a lot about the policies. California is going to be one of the first states in the U.S. like to have, this EPR, the extended producer responsibility policy in the very near future, along with Oregon and other probably 9, a total of 11 states in the U.S. But on the other side, I felt like we're really doing this for the future, independent of whatever the nutrition risk or geopolitical risk.
Maybe I'll just add, I take a very first principles approach. So even kind of what we heard on the earlier panel, which is if you build a better product, like we will find a way to kind of make it work irrespective of policy. And so for me, that means like, you have to have your unit economics working. You have to have a product people will pay for. You can't rely on government subsidies or regulation forever. Like maybe that's a part of kickstarting, but you have to have a plan to build a profitable business with good unit economics. And so, at Arctic, that's always been our goal. And for us, like I said earlier, Shenzhen was faster, cheaper starting out, but that may not be the case forever. And so we're constantly reevaluating that and going back to that first principle approach, which is like, how do we build the best business? And then we know that at scale, therefore, we'll have the biggest climate and emissions impact.
Unfortunately, we are in the business of selling electron, which we need to always work with the stakeholders, utilities, government of a specific location. If we develop a power in California, north, south, center, in China, in Japan, we need to deal with the local regulation and make that happen. But again, that's the beauty of that. So we are not constrained because the technology can deploy with the right local partner to really bypass all of these hurdles and make this project profitable and faster to bring the power on the grid.
Yeah, so we actually work with a lot of brands at this moment to basically navigating the way to, calculating the cost. And specifically for us, I could not, talk about all the material, but for leather in general, there is a little bit of crisis in the way they're distributing leather, not just in America, but also in Europe as well. So when you import leather now here to the US, it's around 45%, like before in 20 and now it's 45%. And our material doesn't fitting into the leather category when you import it. The code is different. So it's the blessing and the curse at the same time, because maybe we have the solution now, but we always need to constantly calculate that cost again when things change in the future.
Awesome. With that, well, thank you so much to our speakers for joining us today. And thank you so much for coming. Do stick around because we have food coming out, and we'll be in the space till 6:30. So feel free to go around and meet folks. Thanks so much.